I'll start by welcoming everyone to today's webinar, where our topic is plant pests threatening Tennessee borders. My name is Neil Letson. I'm a member of the Tennessee Urban-Forestry Council and will be your host this morning. And I also want to introduce Katy Donaldson, whose voice you just heard. She is a very important part of putting these webinars on and handles the registration, the technical aspect, the follow-up with the ISA CEUs. And Katy, we are glad to have you here today. And I didn't get a chance to ask you, but how are things in Knoxville right now?
It is great. It is a beautiful day outside. It's sunny, and I think we're going to get up into the 80s today. So
That's great. It's the same here in Murfreesboro, which is Middle Tennessee, and I hope it's nice where you are at this moment. So for our first-time viewers, let me explain by what these webinars are all about. This is part of a monthly series brought to you free through a partnership between the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council and the University of Tennessee's Department of Natural Resources. Our sole purpose is to try to offer you a wide range of topics that will not only deepen your understanding of the importance of trees in our communities, but hopefully will inspire you to do things that can grow healthier urban forests in the places where we all live. I will also say, though, as our audience continues to grow, we're reaching more people and having our audiences spread throughout the U.S. and to other countries. And I want to make a personal appeal that you to please feel free to suggest any topics or speakers you believe will better contribute to our understanding and care of trees in the urban forest landscape. But we're glad to have you on board as well, and hope this is meaningful to you as it is to the rest of us here. So before we begin, let's just cover a couple of housekeeping items. And Katy, you're going to talk about the ISA CEUs and the Q&A session. Katy, you're muted.
thank you, Neil. Sorry about that, everyone. Thank you for joining today. If you registered and would like to receive a CEU, please take a moment to put your name and your certification number in the chat room. And please, if you have not registered, make sure to do that, because that is how we send your information to get credit for those CEUs. I'm going to drop that link in the chat if you have not registered yet. And as far as questions go, please wait until the end of today's presentation, or not wait, but if you have questions, we will wait until the end to answer your questions. Please submit those in the chat as the presentation is happening. And then again, if you do not list your CEU information, feel free to email that to me at the end of this presentation. And with that, Neil, unless there's anything I left out, I'll turn that back over to you.
No, you covered it well. Thanks, Katy. And today's kind of unique. We have two Katys on board. You've heard from one. Now our speaker is also a Katy. Her name is Katy Kilbourne, and she's a plant pathologist with the Tennessee Department of Agriculture. And Katy is located, and correct me if I'm wrong, Katy, but you're located at the Ellington Ag Center in Nashville, Tennessee. That's the middle part of our state. And Katy, I want to welcome you and appreciate you taking time out to share your knowledge with us. And thank you for being our speaker today. So with no further ado, Katy, we'll turn it over to you.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys. Thank you so much for having me. So I cover the whole state, but so right now I'm actually in Knoxville, I think a floor above the other Katy. I'm actually currently enrolled at the University of Tennessee as a graduate student, potentially working on a PhD on a new emerging pathogen that we found on trees within our nursery industry system. So I'm happy to be here. So I'm just going to get right to it. Okay, so what we're going to talk about today are different plant pests threatening Tennessee borders. And these are the things that we don't have yet in Tennessee, but they're on our radar and things that we have encountered and eradicated, or things that we're actively trying to prevent from spreading into the state. And this guy right here, he is the USDA Hungry Pest mascot, and he is just a man-made of invasive species. So I work for the Department of Agriculture, and within our department, I work within plant certification. So what we do on a day-to-day is regulate the nursery, greenhouse, plant dealers, landscapers, as well as we also work with apiary and hemp. The whole point of what we do is to prevent the spread of pests and diseases through supporting our green industry while maintaining healthy plant material to move not only within our state, but as well as to other states and international trade. And there's a lot of different types of threats, plant threats. Currently, there's 105 pests that are on the National Priority Pest List maintained by the USDA, and they come in all different forms. So diseases, insects, mollusks, as well as plants themselves can be pests. I thought it was pretty funny when I was looking at kudzu pictures that there was an instructional guide on how to grow kudzu, as if anybody would want to grow kudzu. And the main focus of this presentation is to cover not only pests and what to look out for, but to really, really concentrate on the pathways. How are these pests going to get here? There's a lot of different pathways, including interstate and international trade, hitchhikers on travelers, just natural spread and migration of insect pests, as well as firewood. The first pest that's on our radar is box tree moth. This is a new pest that we've just kind of been brought on the radar just in the past few years. It's native to Asia and it's found in Europe and Northern Africa. So box tree moth has a host range that includes boxwoods, euonymus, and some holly. And currently it is found in Canada. In 2021, we had an issue where plants infested with box tree moths were shipped to South Carolina, Michigan, and Connecticut. In addition to that, we had this whole issue where there were many states that potentially received infested materials, and Tennessee was on that list. So prior to this incident, I did not realize that some of our box stores actually buy boxwoods from Canada. So one of our large retail box stores had a shipping distribution center that had received potentially infested material right there in the Memphis area. So we spent a lot of time out there working and surveying to make sure we didn't have an introduction of box tree moth here in Tennessee, and we did not. So that was the good news. So when you're thinking about box tree moth, these are the things that you're going to want to keep your eye out for. So you'll see the caterpillars themselves. You might see on the top right where you might see some eggs on the top of the leaves. You'll see pupa, but a really good sign is you'll see webbing and defoliation on your boxwoods. So we kind of touch on this. So due to the introduction of this pest to the US, the USDA APHIS Emergency Response, which is an Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, issued a federal order to stop the importation of boxwoods, euonymus, and holly into the US. So the pathways here that are biggest concern for this pest are going to be moving from nursery stock. But what we're also going to see, because the US shares a huge border with Canada is we're also probably going to end up seeing some natural migration of this pest just moving south as hosts are available. This is where I get hung up. So I am not an entomologist. I'm a plant pathologist. I work with fungus and bacteria and viruses, but I do like bugs, insects, but I do have a hard time distinguishing some of these. So box tree moth has two different forms. It has a light form and it has a dark form. And there are lookalikes for both forms. So you'll see some of those images below that look similar to a box tree moth. The next pest is one that is also on our radar, but it's native to the US. So this guy, the gold-spotted oak borer, is actually found in Southeast Arizona, and it's causing a lot of issues in California. And I don't know who's on here who may have heard of emerald ash borer, but this is the emerald ash borer's cousin, and it causes the exact same kind of damage, just on a different host. So the gold-spotted oak borer's favorite hosts are going to be the live oaks and the black oaks. And it's always going to look for those larger diameter trees or stress trees. And again, just like with the emerald ash borer, you're going to see the same signs and symptoms. You'll see flagging, you'll see the exit holes that are D-shaped. You'll end up seeing woodpecker damage where it's looking to get to the larva underneath the bark, as well as the serpentine galleries. So we had in about, I think it was about 2018, I had only been in the department for about 4 years then. We got really into having firewood meetings, statewide, to really push heat treated firewood. And we had a meeting up in, where was it? Maybe Cookeville, if anybody's familiar with Tennessee. It's up there on the plateau. It's near a big lake where there's a lot of recreation. And one of the people that came to our meeting brought in a bag of lumber or firewood, a bag of firewood. And he's like, hey, I just want you to know, I bought this at the store, but there's a beetle in there that came out of the wood, but he had closed it up and the beetle was still in there. But the risk was that we were actually suspect for this gold-spotted oak borer. It turned out not to be it, so that was great news. But still, this was firewood that the gentleman had bought at a local store. So we're always keeping our eye out for that. And that is going to be the major pathway for this pest to spread. And this insect does have some lookalikes. Another one that we're actually keeping our eye out for, that's another cousin, is the two-spotted oak borer, which looks pretty similar to the gold-spotted oak borer. So this one is something that a lot of people may not have heard of as a pest that we're keeping our eye out for, but it's the brown garden snail. It's native to Europe, but it's kind of started to spread and is found along the West Coast and the Atlantic coast here in the US. And this pest eats just about everything from bushes to trees to flowers to grains and vegetables, you name it, it will eat it. So you're going to want to keep your eye out for this guy, and they tend to form in clumps. So if you find one garden snail, more than likely you're going to find a lot of garden snails. So that's a tree that's just covered in garden snails. You're also, it's pretty evident to see feeding damage from both slugs and snails. So when you see the holes in the leaves, you'll want to look further. And the reason that I include this pest is because it's got a really interesting pathway. It was actually brought to the US as part of the food trade. It's the snail that a lot of people use for escargot. tried it. I mean, you could cook anything in enough butter and garlic, and I think it's delicious. So, but we have encountered this in nursery stock recently for the past few years on some plants being brought into Tennessee. And I was lucky enough to be able to have one. Our entomologist was out, so I sent some pictures to our federal identifier for garden snail. And sure enough, we had brown garden snail here in Tennessee, and my boss let me keep it. So I kept a couple actually in a terrarium, and they lived for quite some time. I want to say a good 4 months. This one's name was Slippy. He was real cute. They're surprisingly fast. Like for a snail, it was very fast. And the one distinctive part about this snail for some of the other snails that we have are the dark bands that run down, kind of down the shell. They are a little bit different than some of the snails that you might see. So this next pest is one a lot of people have heard of, the Asian longhorn beetle. Currently, the Asian longhorn beetle has been found in 4 states: New York, Ohio, Massachusetts, and South Carolina. South Carolina was the most recent find in 2021. 2021 was a rough year for plants. So in this one, it has a wide host range, which makes it a problem. And most of our native forests are made up of preferred hosts for the Asian longhorn beetle. Okay, so on the left, you're going to see the life cycle. So they say that it's 1 to 2 years. It is believed that it might be two life cycles in a year, and the more south you get, but I'm still waiting for more information on that. But what I have to show you is this video that one of our plant inspectors moved over to work with the USDA, and he got to be on the ground on the team scouting for Asian longhorn beetle in South Carolina. And he caught a video of one emerging for the first time. I just think that's so cool. Like, welcome to the world, little guy. So with the Asian longhorn beetle, what you're going to want to look for really is the beetle itself. They're fairly large beetles, and they're very distinctive with the banded antennae. They also leave really large exit holes in the tree when they emerge. They're a little bit shy the size of a dime. You can also see where the female has chewed holes into the bark so she can lay her eggs. On the bottom left picture, you'll see an old egg egg site as well as a new egg site. And you're with all other boring pests, they do produce a lot of frass. So you can see a larger frass than you would see with some of our different pests. So again, Asian longhorn beetle, the biggest pathway of concern is going to be firewood. They believe the initial introduction into the US was wood packing material, but then from there it spread through firewood to the other states. And this guy has just, I think personally, I think there's just one, the lookalike that's the white spotted Sawyer that's directly underneath would be confusing. But any of the longhorn beetles could be confused for a Asian longhorn beetle. So this next pest is the spotted lanternfly. I know this one got a lot of attention when it was on Saturday Night Live. I don't know if anybody saw that. I thought it was pretty funny, the way they characterized that pest. Right now, spotted lanternfly is a really hot pest because it's spreading very quickly. It's found in 12 states, with the most recent being North Carolina. It is right at very close to being found in Tennessee, I'm pretty sure. So this pest coincides with another pest, but it's a plant pest. It's tree of heaven. That's a highly invasive tree that grows in disturbed areas just about anywhere. It looks similar to some of our native sumac in Tennessee. So that is the preferred host, and it's highly prolific in areas that could potentially be a pathway for spotted lanternfly. So when we focus survey work, we focus on things like railways, where there's going to potentially be some spread, or places that have disturbed area with high number of tree of heaven. So it has a whole bunch of other hosts, but some of the preferred hosts are grapes and hops, which poses a big threat to our wine and beer industries. I know that California just enacted a quarantine so that if you have spotted lanternfly in your area, you can no longer ship plants into California. So that's something we're really trying to prevent from coming here, because our industry ships a lot of plant material out west. So here's the life cycle in the different stages. So you're going to have an egg mass. The first to third instar is black with white spots. The fourth instar is red. And the adult, despite how you frequently see pictures of spotted lanternfly where the wings are spread, this is more likely what you're going to encounter in its resting stage, where it has that kind of beigeish purple with the black spots. Easy, we had an issue where somebody believed they found a large number of the fourth instar insects, but they were actually box elder bugs. And again, some more signs of spotted lanternfly. So like a lot of plant hopper pests, they produce honeydew. So it's a sticky sweet secretion, which actually turns into sooty mold. And I have heard from people in Pennsylvania that if they have infestations, everything is just black. And the egg masses are going to look different depending on their age. So they might be smoother and softer, and kind of like if you've ever seen dried clay. So after time, they kind of get drier and crack. And this pathway is hitchhiking. So this pest will lay its eggs on just about anything. It has been reported that the introduction pathway from Pennsylvania into Virginia was actually a blue stone that Pennsylvania was famous for, that was shipped and installed into a land hardscape setting. which then introduced spotted lanternfly into Virginia. But you'll see that they will lay their eggs on anything. I thought the light bulb was pretty fascinating. Lawn furniture, your car. There's a mass under that trail tire. So this is one of the pests that could easily be spread accidentally. And here's some more lookalikes for this pest. The tiger moth, I could see definitely mistaking for spotted lanternflies, but just keep your eyes peeled for anything on here. If you suspect spotted lanternfly and you're in Tennessee, we do have a special webpage where you can email photos or a location, and we will follow up and go collect for you or from you. And it's the spotted.lanternfly@tn.gov. The next pest is one that's near and dear to my heart because we do annual surveys for this every year. It is sudden oak death / rhododendron blight. So those are actually two different diseases caused by the same pathogen, Phytophthora ramorum. So there's a QR code. Feel free to scan that, and you can read all about the pathogen's life cycle. It's pretty interesting stuff. So it has one disease that causes, or one pathogen that causes two diseases. So we would see more cankers that are oozy on like hardwood species like oak, whereas on understory shrubs, you would generally see more of a foliar blight and dieback. And we have had a lot of issues with Phytophthora ramorum recently, coming from nursery stock from the West Coast coming into Tennessee. We had a big issue in 2019 and 2020 where a nursery shipped plant material from out west and it got to another nursery. There was a huge production nursery that again shipped to all the box stores, and there's a lot of box stores. So we had to go do a statewide trace out investigation to try to locate all these plants. Just a lot of testing, but we didn't find it on that go around, but we did find it another year later from a similar situation from a different nursery to some different box stores. So this one has been showing up more and more in the nursery industry, in the nursery trade in the past few years. It has some lookalikes, and some of them are going to be really tricky. So some of our diseases are caused by different species of Phytophthora that are bad, but they're not as bad as the environmental impacts that Phytophthora ramorum would have if it were introduced into environment, especially in places that have these small micro environments like the Smoky Mountains and the Cumberland Plateau, where we have these areas of cool, moist weather that are very similar to some of the environments you'll see on the West Coast where it's prolific. So we really want to prevent this introduction into those areas. And other spots that you might see, you know, there are some other fungal pathogens that impact the same species, as well as sun scald, which looks similar to the leaf spots. So sudden oak death, rhododendron blight, has a very wide host range, but there's about 10 plants that it really, really prefers, and those are going to include rhododendrons, azaleas, which are rhododendrons, mountain laurel, lilac, pieris, camellia, and multiple other plants that we'll find here in Tennessee. So I wanted to throw in a plant pest that is on our radar, giant hogweed. So this itself is a plant that is the pest. So this was first reported in the US in 1917, and it's believed again to be introduced through the nursery trade. This is a really bad guy and is on the federal noxious weed list. Here you can see a Virginia extension agent standing next to one of these plants. The leaves are very large and the plants are very tall. So the reason why this plant is particularly bad is that it causes phytodermatitis. So when the plant sap touches your skin, it reacts with the sunlight, which leads to burning, which then is just exacerbated by any kind of sweat or any other type of moisture. And you can feel these effects within 15 minutes or up to 2 hours. And I didn't include pictures of it because it's pretty disgusting. So you get these huge, large blisters that kind of pus up and burst, which leads to a lot of scarring. So it's really something to be careful around. And you wouldn't want to burn or compost this plant because of the potential reactions that could come from inhaling the vapors. And I'm really surprised this one hasn't popped up in Tennessee because it's pretty close. So it has been found in some areas of the US, but it is it's right up there in Northeast Tennessee, or it's in North Carolina, right next to the Northeast Tennessee, where it's been reported multiple times. And I don't know if anybody remembers, but there were some few years back where they found a new population and it made the news. And whenever something like that happens, we start to get a lot of calls. And this plant does have a lot of lookalikes, so particularly cow parsnip. And one of the reasons it was introduced for the nursery trade is because it is pretty and it makes a flower that really resembles Queen's Anne's lace, but it's a lot larger. And one of our native things that looks kind of similar is actually elderberry. So we talked about a bunch of different pests and we talked about a bunch of different pathways, but now we're going to kind of talk about what we're doing at the Department of Agriculture to try to protect our state and its resources. So one of the things we do is we establish quarantines. So right now in Tennessee, we have quarantines for boxwood blight. We also have a quarantine in place for Phytophthora ramorum. In case it ever got established, we would be able to have a legal ground to take action to prevent the spread of that pathogen. We also, just in 2020, I think it was, or 2021, we have now a state quarantine for firewood. So any firewood being brought into the state of Tennessee is required to be heat treated. When you heat treat firewood, you're heating the internal temperature for a specific amount of time, to a specific temperature. In Tennessee, we do, oh my gosh, 71 degrees for 75 minutes. And that should kill all the ramorum, all the insect pests that could be bored down inside the wood. We also do a lot of outreach events. So, you know, I appreciate being a speaker here today, as well as we do other extension events, just as well as nursery and partner events, to try to let people know what to look out for. It's a shame that we're not in person. We have a lot of really cool outreach material right now, a lot of cool stickers and koozies and fun things like giveaways. We do a lot of survey work. So currently we're doing a large survey called a nursery commodity survey, where we're surveying for about 22 different pests combined for insects and diseases, as well as an Asian defoliator survey specifically targeting those pests. And we do a lot of training. We go out with industry partners and show them what to look for. We'll help them develop management plans and things along those lines. So that way, if they ever encounter something, they'll know what to do and they know what to keep their eye out for. So what can everybody else do? We can all work on eliminating the pathways. That's the biggest thing we can do to prevent the spread of these invasive pests. You know, number one for me is don't move firewood. Just don't do it. Buy it where you burn it and leave it there when you're going. Another thing you can do is shop local. Look for those garden centers that grow their own material or source locally whenever possible. And always make sure that you are checking your stuff for hitchhikers. We in Tennessee need to be checking our stuff because we want to be good stewards to other states. So if I'm going to go camping, I want to make sure that, my equipment's clean and I'm not bringing firewood. And it's same for vice versa. If I go camping in Virginia, I want to make sure that before I leave, I've checked everything to make sure I don't have any hitchhikers that I could be bringing here back to Tennessee. So this guy, his name is Vinvasive. He's the USDA mascot, and on YouTube you can find a whole bunch of videos that he has made or somebody made of him, where he talks about how happy he is to be an invader. One of my recent grants that I received was for doing some outreach. So we developed some outreach materials. We're putting an outreach display in the Tennessee Department of Agriculture's Agriculture Museum, as well as we will be building this gentleman Vinvasive as a costume. So if you ever see us at an event, there could be somebody dressed up like this character, which would be pretty creepy, right up my alley. So if you're in Tennessee, I guess if you're in Tennessee, I know that there's a lot of people from different places, feel free to reach out to me and we'll look at just about anything you want to send us. We have statewide inspectors that can come and meet you to pick up samples or to do site inspections. We also do training. So if you are a, forestry group or something along the lines and you want to have specialized training, that's something we offer, for free, because we want to help you spread the word, or email or give us a call at the department. And I think that's it for me. And I guess, what am I trying to do here? Stop sharing. If anybody has any questions about what we're doing in Tennessee or anything about any of these pests, I'd love to hear them.
And we actually do have a couple of questions for you. The first one, since Tree of Heaven is the preferred host for spotted lanternfly, it seems a good preventive strategy for a state or community to launch a campaign to locate and eradicate this tree species. Is that reasonable?
Yes, I love that question, and I love where that person's brain is going. So what we're actually kind of working on a collaborative project, and we don't have anything in place yet, which would be great to get a partnership between the Division of Forestry, the department, or our section with the regulatory side, as well as the Tennessee Department of Agriculture, who actually maintains a lot of these disturbed right-of-ways where this tree is growing. So if we can all get this collaboration together, we could work on eradication and reducing that, or reducing the numbers. So I think that would be something that we're working on. Another thing that we are doing in our section is we regulate pest plants in Tennessee. So pest plants are trees or shrubs or plants that you're not allowed to offer for sale within the state. And we have proposed adding Tree of Heaven on that list as well, and giant hogweed, which I spoke about. So that would be moving in a right direction. And I know a lot of people would go, why would anybody plant Tree of Heaven? You'd be surprised.
You kind of answered this a little bit, but about some states, how they restrict or have implemented restrictions on selling certain invasive plants. How can it be done in other states?
So I know that in Tennessee, it was it gets a little tricky to have regulations against invasive plants, especially if it has an impact on commerce. So some of the plants that I detest, like Calorie pear or Bradford pear, it's still popularly being grown and planted. So that's where things get a little bit tricky. If you're in a state that doesn't have any kind of pest plant regulations, see if your state has a invasive plant council group. The Tennessee Department of Ag has a representative on that group. I know it's a collaboration between multi-agencies where you just work on spreading that news, and they're good at getting the word out, and kind of starting with that is a good direction to go, and reaching out to your natural resource managers in your state as well.
Another question, you mentioned Tennessee agricultural agencies have educational outreach materials on plant pests. Who should those in our audience in other states contact to learn more?
So you could always reach out to your Department of Agriculture, Department of Natural Resources. So most states have programs similar to what we do in Tennessee, and sometimes ours is agriculture. Some states like Indiana, I think it's the natural resources, and states like South Carolina, they go through University of Clemson. So finding your extension agent and or your representatives is a really good starting point.
And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
So just some of the outreach stuff that we made. So we have a lot of stickers, and if anybody sends me an email, I will send you a postcard. So we have a bunch of postcards that we made, and I'll just address one to you that says, thanks for participating. I do love, my brain always goes to the hops in wine industry. So a lot of our outreach things we made were all designated towards those industries to spread the word within them, which gave me an excuse to go visit some breweries and give away some coasters and bottle openers and things like that. It was fun.
Okay, some more questions coming in now. What is the new pathogen you mentioned at the start that you're studying?
Oh, that's a great question. We don't exactly know. We know very, very little at this point. So right now we know that we have identified a fungus that's growing from dying trees. It's called Ceratobasidium theobromii. It has not been reported in the US until 2019, and now it's been found in, I think, about 7 or 8 states. It's interesting that reportedly this fungus has only been a pathogen on cacao in Southeast Asia. So that would be a pretty big jump as far as that same fungus ending up here in Tennessee. That would be an interesting pathway study. I think that's pretty neat. How did it possibly get here? But then you learn so much. I did not realize we import a lot of redbuds from other countries, seedlings. I would not have thought that, but yeah, so we don't really know. All we know so far is that we have a fungus and we are associating it with disease, although it hasn't yet been proven. We're actually working on, there's multiple institutions working on pathogenicity testing because it's very difficult with this particular fungus to grow in culture. But so far, this fungus has been recovered from about 20-something hosts, including redbud, dogwood, maple, tulip poplar, black gum, sweet shrub, serviceberry, pretty much a lot of the trees you're going to see in an urban landscape. So I wish I had more to talk about on that, but it's one of those, like, we don't have a lot of information at this time.
Another question, have you heard anything about the honeysuckle secretions from the spotted lanternfly? Apparently, the ingestion is affecting the taste of honey.
I don't know anything about that. So the taste of like honey from honeybees? So honeybees are landing on the honeydew sap and ingesting that. No, that's actually super interesting though. Is it a positive change or like making it taste good, or is it ruining the honey?
She says it's creating a smoky taste.
I'm intrigued. I want to know more.
And those are all the questions I have, unless anyone else has anything they want to throw in the chat real quick.
Okay. Oh, I know. Thank you. That video was so cool. I'm so thankful to Josh Basham. I was so sad to see him go to the USDA because that video was so cool. It's just so neat to see it like being born. But
Okay, here's a question. If my neighbor is continuing to keep dead and dying trees and bushes, that could set it. Wait. I'm not sure what that question is. Oh, they're asking if the neighbor keeps dead and dying trees and bushes, if that could set up diseases.
100%. Yes. So what they're doing, if it's a disease issue that we're talking about, you're just leaving that source of inoculum there in your yard, or they are in their yard, and vice versa. So stress trees usually attract insect pests and, make it more susceptible to pathogens. So removing infested trees or sick trees is a really good practice.
Okay, this question about the Asian longhorn beetle being a pest, was that individual allowed to remain alive that was in the video?
I am not sure. I am guessing that it was culled. That was in South Carolina where they're killing every beetle that they find to prevent the spread there within their state. So it's probably in a vial and jar somewhere on somebody's shelf.
Aren't dead and dying trees essential to wildlife habitat?
Yes, that's a great point. So, dead trees make up important parts of our ecosystem. I think if we were looking at it from a forest perspective and a natural landscape perspective, it's great to leave trees to an extent. Again, I wouldn't recommend doing it with an invasive pathogen. Just, natural decline, trees dying, they get old, or lightning strikes, or tornado, I feel like those scenarios, it's better. It's okay to leave the trees dead on the ground, but what I would avoid is a pest that I know I have in my yard. That's another funny story. It doesn't take long, but I came to UT and went to a training on laurel wilt, and that is a vascular fungus that kills sassafras trees. And I went home and I looked in my yard and I was like, oh my gosh, I have this disease that I just went to this diagnostic workshop on. And so I am not just leaving my sassafras trees, even though they're dead. We're cutting them down and replacing them with different species. So I think, what did I do this year? This year I did crabapples. But yeah, so because I don't want it to spread any further. But as far as trees that just fall from a storm, those are fine.
Okay. It looks like those are all the questions that people have.
Okay.
So, Neil, I don't know if you wanted to make any final remarks.
Yeah, I do. And I want to thank Katy Kilbourne for, I thought, an excellent presentation. And just, the way you presented it, especially with regards to invasive tree pest, I think illustrates the need for all of us to work together across jurisdictional lines, states, regions, that these pests don't show any regard to one state or one area. I mean, they'll go wherever they can survive. So it's important that we spread the message amongst our diverse audience and find ways of collaborating. So I really appreciated that. I do want to, and that our work is really cut out for us with regard to this. So it's all hands on deck. I do want to make a suggestion. I was really, I like the idea you stated about pulling some agencies together, some partners together to address the Tree of Heaven issue. That made a lot of sense to me. And I just like to suggest that you add the Tennessee Urban-Forestry Council to your list of partners. And I know you'll involve the University of Tennessee School of Natural Resources, but Tennessee and a lot of states have these nonprofit councils that can bring in a lot of tree boards, a lot of foot soldiers to help address this on a local level. So as far as our state's concerned, please involve the Tennessee Urban Forestry Council. I think we can help augment your effectiveness. So with that, I want to thank you again, Katy Kilbourne, and also Katie Donaldson for the role you played in putting together an outstanding presentation. And I especially want to thank our audience as well for participating with questions and sticking with us to the end. And with that, Katie, do we need to provide a little teaser for next month? Do you have a slide on that?
Yes, let me share it. There we go.
Okay. As y'all know, we kind of touch on a lot of topics, and I'm really excited about next month's webinar on May 18th, same time, same place. We're going to have Skip Kincaid, who is the executive director for the Southern chapter of the International Society of Arboriculture, and he has a world of experience as an arborist, professional arborist, and he's going to talk to us about how to use a professional arborist to the maximum impact, when to select one and how to hire one. So this has an appeal and should have an interest to all of us here, even you are professional arborists that participate in this. So we're glad that Skip's going to do this for us, and we hope to see you here next month when we have this webinar on how and when to hire an arborist. Okay, and with that, we'll close our webinar. Thank you again for participation. I'm going to ask the two Katys to stick around and we're going to chat for a few minutes, but everybody that participated, please be safe and take care of yourselves. Thank you.